topics in this episode are very sensitive. The vast majority of our Jewish brothers, even in the Orthodox communities, do not hold these views. Israel is a progressive country with equal rights and beautiful families. Even though most Israelis have healthy views of women in our society, in ultra-Orthodox communities and the teachings of the rabbis contradict the scriptures and put women in darkness and shame. Our hope is to shine the light of truth on these dark subjects and reveal how God sees women in the light of our Messiah.
Shalom from the Holy Land of Israel. In this recent video from One for Israel entitled Myth Number 12, the oral Torah sees women as the daughter of the king. After this warning at the beginning, various examples of misogynistic comments from a number of rabbis are given before leading to the punchline that this is not what Jesus taught. So let's listen to what some of the leading church fathers had to say about women. Men should not sit and listen to a woman, even if she says admirable things or even saintly things. That is of little consequence since it came from the mouth of a woman. Origen, from the 3rd century CE. He was a church father widely regarded as one of the most important Christian theologians of all time. And do you not know that you are an Eve? The sentence of God on this sex of yours lives in this age. The guilt must of necessity live too. You are the devil's gateway. You are the unsealer of that forbidden tree. You are the first deserter of the divine law. You are she who persuaded him, whom the devil was not valiant enough to attack. That came from Tertullian, a prolific Christian writer famous for being the very first Latin writer to use the term Trinity, and he lived from the 2nd to the 3rd century CE. God maintained the order of each sex by dividing the business of life into 2 parts and assigned the more necessary and beneficial aspects to the man and the less important, inferior matter to the woman. From John Chrysostom, an early church father and a prolific Christian author, regarded as a saint. He lived in the 4th century CE. Woman was given to man. Woman who was of small intelligence and who perhaps still lives more in accordance with the promptings of the inferior flesh than by superior reason. Is this why the Apostle Paul does not attribute the image of God to her? Saint Augustine. He was one of the most important and influential church fathers, and he was Bishop of North Africa, who helped formulate the doctrine of original sin. And he lived in the 4th to the 5th centuries CE. As regards the individual nature, woman is defective and misbegotten, for the active force in the male seed tends to the production of a perfect likeness in the masculine sex, while the production of woman comes from a defect in the active force, or from some material indisposition, or even from some external influence. Thomas Aquinas. He was a friar and a priest, one of the Catholic Church's greatest theologians and philosophers, and he lived in the 13th century CE. Woman is the root of all evil. Saint Jerome, translator of the Bible into Latin, and he was considered the most learned of all the Roman Church fathers. He lived in the 4th to the 5th century CE. Sadly, Misogyny can rear and has reared its ugly head among some of its important practitioners in both Christianity and in Judaism and in every other mainstream religion as well. And do remember that the world of these church fathers I'm quoting from, as well as rabbis in the time of the Talmud, was generally a time when most women were married early in their teens, had to keep house without any modern conveniences, and usually had very few rights in the laws of the lands in which they lived. But what do we actually learn about women from the Tanakh? Jewish understanding about Eve, that's Hava, eating from the fruit of the forbidden tree, yes, it was a transgression, but deep down, ultimately, it's considered she was actually responding to the desire from God himself through the feminine aspect of his divine presence that Jews call the Shekhinah, to be part of this physical world and to permeate everything. The time of the moshiach, when all the world will acknowledge the true reality of the one God who created us all, this inner desire will finally be fully revealed. This is from the God who created evil as well as good, as Isaiah tells us in chapter 45. And certainly I know personally that while harm obviously comes from doing wrong, God can use that wrong to open up, to work, to create something better than would ever have existed without it. Sarah, the wife of Abraham, she's recognized as being higher spiritually than even Abraham was. God told Abraham, whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her. Genesis chapter 21, verse 12. Rebecca, who married Isaac, by her act of hesed, of kindness and giving to another person first, when she said, drink, and I will also draw water for your camels to drink, in Genesis chapter 24, verses 17 to 18, she subsequently became the mother of two nations, Israel and Esav. And she sought out any opportunity to do good and to do it with complete eagerness. Miriam, the sister of Moses, who watched Pharaoh's daughter find her baby brother in his little reed boat and arranged for his own mother to nurse him. Later, she led the women of Israel in singing a song of deliverance after crossing the Sea of Reeds. And Deborah, she was a judge in her own right. She led the people of Israel justly and wisely and was a prophetess. They ceased living in unwalled towns in Israel. They ceased until I, Deborah, arose. I arose as a mother in Israel. That's from Judges chapter 5, verse 7. And we come to Ruth, the archetypal convert who was an ancestor of King David himself, and thereby the future moshiach, who declared to her mother-in-law, Naomi, where you go, I will go. Where you dwell, I will dwell. Your people are my people, and your God is my God. That's from Ruth chapter 1, verse 16. Esther, queen of Ahasuerus, who saved the Jewish people from being destroyed by risking her own life in going to the king without being summoned. So I will go to the king, contrary to protocol. And if I perish, I perish. Esther chapter 4, verse 16. Judaism recognizes that there are innate differences between men and women. One is not better than the other, simply we are different and complementary to one another. Women's influence on the next generation is paramount, and it is from women and not from men that Jewish status is actually derived. It is from Jewish women who have the responsibility of maintaining the three important mitzvot. Those are commandments central to the Jewish home: Kashrut, Shabbat, and the Mikvah. And the Talmud tells us that it is in the merit of Jewish women that the moshiach and the final redemption of the Jewish people will come. That's from Sotah 11. So-called rabbinic Judaism, actually the authentic, real thing, is all about loving and serving Hashem, what we call God, as he has commanded us to do, as our part of the eternal covenant he made with us, the Jewish people. Our rabbis have not added or taken away from the Torah. Firstly, there are fences preventing us from getting too close to breaking an actual Torah ruling. For instance, we are not allowed to write on Shabbat. But we are additionally not actually allowed by rabbis, going all the way back to the time of Ezra, to take hold of a pen on Shabbat, because we might otherwise be tempted to write something. So that fence, if we accidentally lift up a pen, we haven't actually broken the Torah. But if we know we're not supposed to do that, we can put it down quickly. That fence protects us from accidentally going over the edge and breaking a commandment, ultimately from the Torah itself. Secondly, there is a necessary flexibility in the oral law, because things change and there are many new inventions. For instance, how do we apply the commandment not to light a fire on Shabbat to today's instant electricity? Based on previous precedent, tremendous and lifelong study of the Talmud, which consists essentially of arguments about the most minuscule applications of even very unlikely circumstances in Jewish law, and many not accepted in the end. So it's easy to quote from something that doesn't actually become part of halakha. A ruling can be made and has been. And God gave the authority to rabbis, in a direct line down from the kings and prophets of old, to rule on and administer the rulings of Jewish law in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 2 to 6. Every Shabbat, when men return from the synagogue to enjoy a festive family meal together, the men sing Eishet Chayil, written by King Solomon in praise of women. You can read the whole of this in Proverbs chapter 31, verses 10 to 31. A woman of valor, who can find? She is more precious than corals. Her husband places his trust in her and profits only thereby. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She considers a field and purchases it, and plants a vineyard with the fruit of her labors. She invests herself with strength and makes her arms powerful. She opens her hands to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She makes and sells linens. She supplies the merchants with sashes. She is robed in strength and dignity, and she smiles at the future. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and a lesson of kindness is on her tongue. She looks after the conduct of her household and never tastes the bread of laziness. Her children rise up and make her happy. Her husband praises her. Many women have excelled, but you excel them all. Grace is elusive and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears God, she shall be praised. If you're Jewish, don't be fooled or misled by Christian missionaries. Judaism can be a truly fulfilling and beautiful way of life, a very godly way of life that enables us to enjoy life to the full while also being sensitive and caring to all those around us. And personally, as an ex-Christian, professional, intelligent, and highly educated woman with a PhD who, with the help of God, embraced the path of my Jewish ancestors, personally, I can certainly attest to that. Thank you.